We all know about some of the most insane and broken metas that Overwatch had to endure over its years. There are also hundreds of videos talking about them already that haunt some of the heroes to this day.
Leave me alone!
That being said, during its over 10 years of history, Overwatch has had some really crazy and absurd metas that aren't as well known as Goats or Double Shields, either because they didn't last as long or were prominent during the lowest points of the game. That's why today I will be going over most of them, explaining which changes led into these compositions dominating the game, why they were so powerful, and how or why they ended. We begin with a very old gem from the years before role queue was a thing, the Quad Tank meta. No one cared to give it a cooler name, okay? The precursor of Goats, the Quad Tank meta, as you might have guessed, was composed of 4 tanks, usually Rein, D.Va, Hog, and Zarya, with Moira and Lucio as their supports, but you would sometimes see Rein replaced with Winston and Moira with Ana in some maps that required more range or verticality. Although this comp wasn't present in every map, it was developed specifically to counter the Orisa plus Sniper heavy meta that had been on the rise, and its power came from the raw durability of the 4 tanks combined with the high AoE healing output of Moira with the help of Lucio that would be able to sustain the map. The overall game plan was simple. 5 short-range heroes, aided by Lucio's speed, would rush the enemy at the same time and kill them with pure pressure and stats. There wasn't much complexity to it, but it would easily shut down heroes like Widow or Hanzo that relied on their one-shots and long-range presence, as well as pushing through Orisa's defenses with no issue, since before her rework she was basically Domina but with no sustain. Between Ryan's shield, D.Va's matrix, and the overall healing, you could easily ignore any high ground presence and push towards the objective while attacking. It could be used on defense, but generally on maps like Volskaya that lacked any meaningful verticality on its main choke, since they did have a big weakness when it came to the overall tempo, as they were very reliant on Lucio's amp speed to move around, which was somewhat limited with the long cooldown it has. This is also where the Winston Ana variant came in to help control spaces from more angles in maps like Junkertown. Some of the reasons for the comp becoming popular were Hog and D.Va, who had received multiple buffs over time that had made them really threatening damage dealers to compensate for the lack of a dedicated DPS, as well as the introduction of Moira as the highest AoE healing support at the time that enabled this tank heavy composition early on before Break's introduction. The motive this comp didn't become even more popular, especially in the more casual area of the community, is due to the lack of players that play tank in ranked to begin with, requiring high coordination, while in the more professional spaces it had some exploitable flaws like a supported Reaper that would take them out of commission to be later perfected as the Goats meta, that initially shared 5 of the 6 heroes from the most common Quad Tank roster, only swapping Hog with Brick and later on swapping Moira for Zen. Beyblade is probably the most popular and the oldest comp on this video, but it's impossible to deny the sheer absurdity of it as well as how powerful it was. As the name implies, the idea was to charge a Nano Boost and a Death Blossom, combine them both with a Lucio speed boost, and you had a spinning monstrosity. Not only were speed boosts not capped, but Ana would always provide 50% speed on Nano, leading to some insane clips. At the time, okay, this was pretty early for Overwatch, I know how silly this looks in comparison to proper. That being said, it was still a big threat on the higher levels of play. Not only did some of the answers to Death Blossom just not exist at the time, but stuff like D.Va's Matrix functioned very different, or well, were simply a lot worse and made it much harder to counter. The player base was also a lot worse at playing the games as a whole, so cheesy strats like this weren't dealt with properly. The end of Beyblade would come with a combination of Nano no longer granting speed, as well as global changes like stacking speed boost being nerfed. The Blossom as a whole would also be indirectly nerfed multiple times, with heroes like Sigma and Brick being added, as well as D.Va's rework that adjusted her matrix into a resource mechanic. You can try to recreate it with Ana's Speed Serum perk providing speed again, but you will quickly realize how weaker it is in the current day. Don't mind the clip, my Ana didn't even pick it. One of the earlier gems that this game had the blessing to show to the world. Another nano-induced meta, but this one has a PlayStation moment on it. It might have been in Xbox too, but it's funnier to think it's Sony's fault, okay? In 2018, Blizzard would add Bastion's Ironclad passive, which would provide 35% damage reduction whenever he was transformed. What they forgot is the fact that Nano provides 50% damage reduction, which would stack, making Bastion near immortal while Nano was up. Well, even without Nano, he was pretty hard to kill. Luckily this was dealt with in 2 days by, similarly to Speed Boost, capping the maximum stacking damage reaction to 50%, as well as nerfing Ironclad from 35 to 20%, making it the shortest lasting meta ever. Except the patch couldn't be done for PS4 for another 2 weeks. That's the Sony moment I was talking about. Unfortunately, ranked in console became pretty much unplayable for those weeks, which left players furious and confused into why it wasn't patched there yet. It's a pretty funny story unless you play it on console. Sorry to interrupt the video, but most of my viewers aren't actually subscribed. It would help me a lot to keep up making videos if you check that you are, as well as turning on the notifications. YouTube sometimes doesn't work, and this ensures to know whenever I upload a video. Without further to say, let's get back to it. We were very bored in 2020, okay? Zarya Hog was one of the most disruptive metas we have seen during Overwatch 1. Never before had a meta comp be composed of 2 off-tanks, not even during the early days. After many and many nerfs to Orisa, Sigma and Ryan's shields, as well as a Roadhog buff, the game had quickly shifted away from shields and into a burst heavy meta where one-shots and similar were everything. In that regard, what better tank to be played than the one that can one-shot everyone, as well as dealing so much damage, he would tear apart any of the now nerfed shields like they were nothing. That being said, Orisa, his most usual partner, was basically a throw pick during time, leading players to experiment a bit. Zarya would allow Hog to take riskier plays, but would completely deny the most common answers to Hog in crowd control and anti-nade, as her bubble would block most stuns, as well as being able to cleanse Hog. At that time, Hog's self-healing was a cooldown rather than a resource, so shutting it down meant he was essentially dead. Despite the strength of this combo, in theory, it would fall down against sniper heavy comps that would outrange both tanks and pick off the enemy supports, due to the clear lack of an actual frontline and vertical weakness. That being said, adaptations of the comp quickly shifted towards double sniper with a Hog and Zarya, so they wouldn't have that issue. This comp would fall out of favor after some Hog nerfs, as well as a buff to the other tanks that would provide a bit more consistency to be able to deal with Hog and the overall burst damage. This one goes into the dishonorable mention due to being very recent, but I still had to talk about it due to how dumb and wide it is as a concept. If you haven't watched the Overwatch CS for the last months, with the release of Jetpack Cat and its capability to carry players, pros found no better use of it than to just pick up a Bastion and become an X-Wing, deleting everything on its path. The combination of Bastion tankiness and damage during Sentry, especially when pocketed with the Cat's healing, and shielded transportation perk, allowing Fika to become pretty much unkillable as long as you're transporting someone, made for a very nasty duo that took quite some time to find reliable answers to, and to this day is still somewhat prevalent despite receiving multiple nerfs. The reason why Bastion by himself isn't an issue is the fact that he's slowed while in turret mode. The Cat not only removes the slow, but increases the mobility of an ability designed around having limited movement. Oh, and that's not even taking into account Link on the explosives, which turns Bastion into a rocket launcher. So his range gets even better, allowing the duo to just fly around the skybox indefinitely. The most obvious answer would be D.Va, but not only she couldn't deal enough damage to take them out by herself, but she's also one of the most common bans in pros, so you needed to have some other alternatives. People were trying stuff like Soldier Symmetra or even Hog to counter it, and while it would work in some scenarios, it was much easier to just mirror it and let the better helicopter win. As I mentioned, the comp is still pretty viable, and playing on some maps, the nerfs to Fika transportation, as well as the perks that really exacerbated this duo, would prove enough to make them not as problematic and easier to deal with. The Cat is still causing some mayhem at the time of recording though. Oh, this one's a classic. Pirate ship or bunker comps were the cheesiest of the cheesy comps during the original Overwatch, and basically a classic in lower ranks in most payload maps. The gameplay was pretty simple. Bastion, who at the time couldn't move during sentry mode, would get pocketed by shields, damage boost and the sword as much as possible, usually being moved by the payload itself, deleting every uncoordinated player in a matter of milliseconds. Historically, this comp would fall apart in higher ranks due to how easy it was to shut down with specific heroes like D.Va, as well as hacking versatility with how Orisa was balanced at the time. What a surprise it would be when San Francisco Shock would decimate the Overwatch League by playing the now improved bunker comp with Sigma and Bap added into the game. Sigma would become a stable partner to Orisa, as well as allowing the comp to have another shield whenever Orisa's went down, as well as being able to cover high ground or stun divers with his rock that went through D.Va's Matrix or Genji's Deflect, dealing with some of the most common answers to the comp. Bap would be a staple not only as he had incredible AoE healing, but would also support in dealing with longer range heroes, something Moira couldn't do. This comp will fall out of favor in coordinated play after double shield got nerfed, but it will still pop up here and there occasionally and would keep terrorizing lower levels of play until Overwatch 2 reworked Bastion and Orisa. A less crazy but more obscure meta was the one during the beta of Overwatch 2, which, due to its similarity to you know which meta, was named Joats, which was basically Junker Queen Goats. It is also the only comp that had two main supports as part of their backline with Lucio and Brig. Junker Queen came out swinging really hard during Overwatch 2 beta. Her shout was, simply put, broken. Not only was the cooldown 10 seconds, but it also gave speed and overhealth for the same value as Junker Queen for 5 seconds, which, added with the AoE healing of Lucio and Brig, would lead into a rush heavy comp that was also incredibly hard to kill. Having a Genji with 5 seconds of 100 overhealth and speed boost was too much, especially for the early days of the new 5v5 format before many supports received some survivability buffs. The idea was to cycle between Shout and Lucio's stun speed to move around the map, removing the weakness that Watzank used to have back in the day, reducing the windows of counterplay. Kiriko was also not yet in the game, so Reckoning was pretty much the best ultimate in the game. Funnily enough, everything else about Junker Queen is a lot stronger now, but it shows how game-breaking certain supportive abilities can be and enabling other heroes. It's also even more funny that she got gutted with the game release, reducing Shout's value on allies as well as increasing its cooldown, which also happened to be when Kiriko was added, her most clear counter to this day, outside of Zarya I guess, leaving her as the worst tank in the game for multiple seasons. What if the meta was decided by a cat? No, I am not talking about Fika. I am talking about a normal house cat.
So ultimately Nori decides it is in the fates of a cat.
Yeah, okay, wait.
We
okay.
can see them perfectly.
He touched this one first, so this one was the first one.
Come on, Nori.
There was a period of time where the game had hero pools or global bans that would rotate each week, as a way to diversify the meta as well as supposedly making the game more interesting, forcing players to experiment and get out of their comfort heroes for once. Yeah, well, that could be in theory cool and all, but it led to some disgusting weeks that made for some of the worst experience in the entire history of the game. One of those weeks is the last composition for today in nothing else than the flyer meta. What would happen in a world without hitscans or any answers to Pharah? Well, don't worry, Blizzard made sure to give us that answer by banning basically every hitscan in the game and Sombra just to make sure. What happened next? Pharah Mercy and Echo in virtually every game. If you ever have any complaints about Blizzard, you have no idea how truly awful the maintenance mode era was. You really don't. There is not much analysis or discussion to be had about it, as players knew it would just last a week and would either abuse Pharah or not play the game at all, but I wanted to document hero pools for newer players as it is something that doesn't get much talk. Fortunately, this awful week caused a lot of outrage in social media and would lead to the removal of hero pools as a whole, marking the end of yet another awful choice during the last years of the original Overwatch. So, any meta in particular you found the craziest? Do you think Blizzard will be able to top stuff like Beyblade or Bastion? I read you in the comments down below. That's all everyone, remember to leave a like and subscribe to see more content in the future, as well as checking out my channel if you want to see more videos like this one. See you next time.